Today's story was written by Reddit user Moonfly71. Galactic Stardate 13459. Galactic Rotations. Report on Zathrek Remainder and Aldrani System Conflict. Report delivered by Commander Gonzar of the Galactic Navy upon request of the Galactic Council. As commanded, I intercepted a fleet of Zathrek Remainder warships crossing the empty space between their few remaining systems and the home system of the Aldrani, managing to do so only a few galactic units from the Aldrani border. Ever since the Zathrek war against the Grisani and the subsequent brutal vengeance by their human allies, the Zathrek have been silent and disturbingly peaceful for a species whose entire culture is built upon war and violence. Some among the Galactic Council have been of the opinion that the humans had finally been the ones to break this prideful and dangerous species of their violent ways. But the moment the Zathrek sent out their warships across intergalactic space, the more pragmatic species on the Council were proven correct once again. Although, as you will see further in my report, they were not as correct as it seemed at first glance. The Zathrek fleet must have consisted of every last battle-capable ship the Zathrek had left after the human counter-invasion, along with every ship they had managed to build in the several years since their devastating loss. It was a truly grand armada for a people who had recently been savaged and had an entire celestial body thrown into their capital planet. And it was before this great armada that the small squadron of interceptors the Galactic Council had seen fit to equip me with cut off the Zathrek advance. As per Council regulation, I beamed a signal requesting a holo meeting with the commander of the Zathrek fleet to the lead ship. I expected no reply besides a salvo of plasma across my bow and immediate loss of my entire squadron, as the threat assessment program in my ship extrapolated to be the most likely result after going over every scrap of information that our databases have on hailing Zathrek ships. As such, myself and indeed the ship's entire crew were greatly shocked when the Zathrek actually accepted our communications uplink. So surprised that the entire deck silently stared at the Zathrek commander as he appeared on our holocom. It took several moments for me to collect myself from my shock, during which time the Zathrek commander simply waited, clearly impatient and a tad annoyed, but silent and waiting all the same. This alone almost caused another round of shock, but luckily I had pushed through my confusion and continued with what protocol mandated I do. Zathrek Remainder warship. This is Commander Elbreach Gonzar of the Galactic Navy. You are in breach of your accords with the hegemony of Sol and the punitions placed on your people by the Galactic Council. Cease your advance immediately and surrender your fleet for demilitarization and your soldiers for detainment until the Council decides your fates. Compliance will be taken into account when that punishment is determined, so please, come quietly. The Zathrek commander threw his mighty head back and laughed. His great jaw completely opened as he laughed deep into his chest, the razor-sharp, deep green fangs in his mouth gleaming in the light of the holocal. Immediately, I expected mockery, refusal, and threats of violence, and those I somewhat received. But just like the Council, I was not entirely wrong, nor was I entirely correct either. War fleet? Council stooge, this is no war fleet, and if it were, it would not stop for the likes of you, not in your clearly under-equipped vessels. The Council truly shows how it feels about the protection of its member systems, doesn't it? If we were truly attacking, you would not be the ships blocking our path. If we once again sailed for war, the warriors of Sol would stand in your place. The Zathrek seemed to catch himself before he could wind up any further into his almost frantical speech, and took a deep breath which he released in a heavy sigh, the frantic energy that had built up draining from his posture. The sound came out as a deep hiss from between his teeth. It was an action remarkably human, a trait I had only truly seen among humanity, or those living within or working closely alongside the hegemony of soul. As I said, we are not a war fleet. I am Admiral Kirkran Kinvac, of the 1st Protectorate Fleet. I and my sworn brothers and sisters marched to the aid of the Aldrani against the Vabravi outbreak on several of their origin planets, a job that would not be ours to garner the glory of if your precious council was doing its job. From my side, my second-in-command Lieutenant Vorak could not control his shock and blurted a question. Why in the coldest depths of space would you be doing that? I swiftly placed a grasping tentacle on my second's furry arm, and stepped forward to make it clear who would be addressing the Zathrek Admiral. What my lieutenant means to ask, Admiral Kinvac, is why the Zathrek remainder would be doing something so counter to your culture and beliefs. Correct me if I'm wrong, but your people place a very strong importance on survival of the fittest, and believe that those that die are weak, and deserve any death they cannot protect themselves from. Such was your justification in your war against the Grisani, if I'm not much mistaken. I find it hard to believe that you would simply toss all of that aside and come to selflessly aid the entire system so far from your own just because you heard of an outbreak of a dangerous creature. Especially with the current restrictions on your military movements, and your own acknowledgement of the careful eye of the hegemony of soul is keeping on your actions. You can understand why such a large fleet leaving your system at a breakneck speed, bound for the Aldrani in a time where their military is already engaged with an inner threat, might be suspicious to my superiors. Admiral Kinvac flicked out his tongue in a common Zathrek gesture of annoyance, his clawed, bootless foot tapping impatiently against the metal floor of his ship's deck, once again displaying remarkably human traits. I do not care how this seems to your superiors, little council soldier. My fleet has no time for pesky annoyances and the time-wasting idiosyncrasies of the Galactic Council's protocols. If this was before the education of soul, I would have already destroyed your pitiful forces and been gone on my task. But as it is not, and since all Zathrek should respect the strength of will and dedication to your job as a protector it takes for you to stand before a superior force and demand surrender, I invite you to join the 1st Protectorate Fleet in its mission. If you truly cannot believe our words, then observe our actions and where our claws strike. Perhaps if you join us, the Council may yet claim some honour and pride in this matter. It is at this time that I, as the highest rank present, and as leader of this mission, made the decision to do exactly what the Zathrek commander asked. I will not bore the Council with any more unnecessary details from this point forward, but keep my explanation brief and to the point. I say this because there is a lot of information to grasp, both leading up to and during this conflict, and I do not have the time, knowledge, or inclination to explain all the required context here today. I say this also so that you will trust me when I say that everything I do explain is of vital importance. The 1st Protectorate Fleet made contact with the Aldrani, not by sending a communications request to their government or any overhead official, but by cruising directly into the orbit of the nearest Vabravi-infested planet and beaming a message directly to the larger ship stationed there. The message contained was simple and to the point. "We are the first Protectorate fleet of the Zathrek remainder. You have a Vabravi infestation. We are here to remove it for you and have graciously agreed to share the glory with your warriors who already fight. Do not resist." Admiral Kinvac, whose command ship we had since docked with, then seized me with one arm and carried me bodily to the Zathrek dropships, waiting for departure. The Admiral only stopped long enough to see me equipped in Zathrek war gear altered to my species, which I was quite surprised to see, and to allow me to command my second to try to better explain the situation to the Aldrani, and then we were off to fight the Vabravi, myself somewhat unwillingly tagging along. What followed that day, and indeed for the next standard week, was an experience I can never forget. I stood with limb sphere to shoulder with the towering reptilian Zathrek soldiers, their traditional weaponry clinched in my tentacles as we joined the Aldrani soldier in containing and eliminating a truly vile mutant strain of Vabravi. This particular variant of that insectoid creature had been infected with some kind of parasitic fungus that made them much harder to truly put down, a more accurate description of which is in my official report. We retook 17 populated districts on 4 planets in just a week. Working with Zathrek was truly a masterclass in how to decimate a foe. But it was after the fighting, after I had truly bonded alongside these masterful soldiers, that I truly learned something. Because it was after the fighting that I was finally able to speak with the Admiral on somewhat equal terms, and what he told me was enlightening. I asked him what had changed for the Zathrek, as I watched them after the battles handing out medical supplies and cooking food for the exhausted soldiers who had fought beside them. His explanation began with something seemingly unrelated. He started with the origin of his species' name. You see, the Zathrek are not the first creatures to bear that name on their planet. The name once belonged to a terrifying predator that was as tall as one of their thick-walled homes, with half a micro-unit thick scales and claws that shredded the toughest armour. These creatures, the original Zathrek, hunted the people who would one day bear their name as prey and ate them in the dozens. It was from these creatures, these apex predators that dominated Zathrek Prime, that the modern Zathrek learned their life philosophy. These predators killed everything that was weak, even each other. They were so dangerous because they had to be. A single mistake or sign of weakness would see them slaughtered by their own kin and mates. The creature they hunted, then simply called the people, learned to emulate their predators. Weakness was thus eliminated from the people. Every impurity and cowardly trait driven out under the rule of survival of the fittest, and eventually, over generations, the people eliminated the Zathrek one at a time. To never forget these mighty beasts that had taught them how to survive, they took on their mighty name, a name which, literally translated, means strongest. Admiral Kinvac explained to me that this was the true core philosophy of his people, the truest representation of their culture, to learn from the strong, to emulate them, and to eventually overcome them by their own methods. He then explained that they had not met any creature or species that could truly teach them in generations. They had reached their pinnacle in their conquest, and the education of the Zathrek had lasted them for thousands of galactic standard years, until they tried to expand onto an insignificant system ruled by a weak, six-limbed scientist that did not even come up to a Zathrek's knees. It was in their war with the Grisani that the Zathrek reached their second era, as they track such things. The second education, the education of soul, the education of humanity. When the hegemony of soul finally defeated the Zathrek forces by slamming their own moon into their capital, they did not break the warrior race's spirit. They did the opposite. They lit a new flame in the belly of every single Zathrek. They taught them a new lesson and began a new age. It is my belief that a new philosophy has been born in the hearts of the Zathrek, a philosophy based entirely on the actions of the humans, both in the Grisani conflict and in the galaxy at large. To hear Kinvac tell it, the humans showed the Zathrek what true strength looks like. True strength is to be so strong, so absolutely dominant, that you can protect and aid those weaker than you at a moment's notice, and on nothing more than a whim. The Zathrek believe that humanity has reached a peak of strength where they can ignore the rules of survival of the fittest, where they, and they alone, can decide if the weak should be preserved until they are strong. This then explains the Zathrek's actions with the Aldrani's Vabravi problem. They are attempting to emulate the actions of the hegemony of soul, stepping in on conflicts, hardships, and any problem they can see seemingly at random, because they believe doing so is a declaration of their strength and might. The Zathrek also do this to grow their might, to continue to reap the honour and glory that the humans have so far monopolized. The Zathrek Remainder's ultimate goal is to usurp humanity's role as chief guileless protectors. The Admiral and his superiors believe this will take many standard years, if not centuries, but that they will one day succeed just as they did against the original Zathrek, and when they do, they plan on taking the name of their defeated foes, and becoming humans. Though I was assured the annihilation of the current humanity would not occur as it did with the Zathrek, for the education of humanity is teaching a different lesson than the education of the Zathrek, until such a day passes for the Zathrek Remainder that they can claim humanity's name for themselves. However, they have given them a title. To the Zathrek Remainder, they are once again simply the people, and the humans are now the Zathrek, the strongest. It is my personal recommendation to the Council that we do not interfere with the Zathrek Remainder's ultimate goal, as doing so would cause more conflicts than they will on their own. So far, they have actually proven helpful, not harmful. My second recommendation is that we do not inform any representative of humanity of the cultural changes among the Zathrek, lest they immediately become horrified at the changes they have made to a unique and indigenous culture, and attempt to somehow halt the Zathrek in their mission, or preserve the cultural ideals that they are leaving behind. In line with this recommendation, I would like to thank the Council for excluding the representative of the hegemony of soul from this debriefing, and for not allowing said representative to read my initial report. Likewise, I would like to specifically thank the Grisani representative for supporting my decision, as we both share the fear that doing something other than what we have could cause a large amount of undue anxiety to our human allies, as has been repeatedly proven to us over the years, as I think we can all recall. Thank you for hearing my humble report on this matter, and I hope that this revered body can use my report to further the greatness of the Galactic Council. That is all.